Every great story is an iron odyssey, a long and difficult journey that tests the very limits of human endurance and will. Follow our characters as they navigate the rocky paths of fate to find their ultimate home. Subscribe today and join the most epic journey of the digital age.
The $800 million valuation felt abstract until the moment I stood in my in-laws' foyer, watching my mother-in-law straighten the floral arrangement she'd had flown in from a florist in Manhattan, and I thought, she has no idea. Neither did anyone else in that house. I had driven up from the city that morning, 3 hours north to their estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of property that doesn't show up on real estate sites because it's never for sale. Stone gates. A circular driveway. Maple trees, so old they remembered a different century. My husband had flown in from a conference in Chicago and would arrive by dinner. He knew everything, of course. He was the only one who did. I set my overnight bag down in the guest room. Always the guest room, never your room, never anything that suggested I belonged here, and looked out the window at the lawn crew setting up white linen tables for the evening. 40 years of marriage. My in-laws were celebrating 40 years, and apparently that required 60 guests, a string quartet, a catering company from New Haven, and approximately every powerful person in Fairfield County. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Viridian Architecture. Board approval. Final valuation confirmed. I dismissed it and went downstairs. My mother-in-law was in the kitchen directing the caterers with the focused energy of a general who had never lost a battle. She was beautiful in the way that wealthy women of a certain age are beautiful, expensive, curated, effortless-looking in a way that requires enormous effort. She glanced up when I walked in. "Oh, you made it." A smile. Not warm, not cold. The temperature of marble. "I wasn't sure if you'd have work." "I cleared my schedule," I said, thoughtful. She turned back to the caterers. That was how it always went. Not cruelty exactly. Something more polished than cruelty. Dismissal with impeccable manners. My father-in-law appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, already in his dinner jacket even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. He was 71, silver-haired. The kind of man who treated every room like a boardroom. He had built a regional insurance company into a national firm. He had opinions about everything and said most of them. "There she is," he said in the tone people use when they've been mildly surprised that something showed up. The artist. He had called me the artist for 7 years. Not my name, not his son's wife, the artist. Like it explains something unflattering. "Architect," I said, the way I always said it. Right. He patted my shoulder once, the way you'd pat a child who had answered a question incorrectly but tried their best. "How's the firm? Still doing residential work?" "We've expanded." Good. Small firms need to stay nimble." He moved past me toward the bar cart he'd set up in the sitting room. "Want anything? We've got a scotch your husband would love. I'll save him some." He didn't offer me any. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, and I had the same feeling I always had in that house. The feeling of being audible but not heard, visible but not seen. I had felt it at the wedding when my mother-in-law had introduced me to her friends as Colton's wife. She does something with buildings. I had felt it at every Thanksgiving, every Easter, every carefully orchestrated family event where I sat at the table and watched my in-laws' world perform itself. The investments. The legacy. The name that meant something in 3 states. My name was Nadia Voss. I had kept my own name. That alone had been a conversation. I went upstairs and changed for dinner. The earliest version of Viridian Architecture had been a drafting table in a studio apartment in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, that I shared with 2 roommates and a persistent mold problem near the bathroom window. I was 26. I had just left a firm in Midtown where a senior partner had told me, gently, professionally, that I had strong instincts but perhaps not the presence clients expect at the senior level. I had nodded, thanked him, gone to the bathroom, sat in a stall for 4 minutes, then walked out and resigned. That had been 9 years ago. The apartment came first, then a shared office space in Dumbo, then a real lease in Red Hook with 2 employees and a drafting wall that ran the full length of the back room. My partner in the firm, a structural engineer named West who I had met at a conference in Portland and who had agreed to my handshake deal over terrible conference coffee, Always said I had a gift for seeing what a space was supposed to be before it existed. I thought of it differently. I saw what people needed even when they couldn't name it. We built our first commercial project in 2018, a small medical clinic in Brownsville that the neighborhood had needed for 15 years and that the city had repeatedly underfunded. We did it for a fee that covered costs and nothing more. Wes thought I was insane. 6 months later, an article in Architectural Record described the project as quietly revolutionary. 3 new clients called the following week. By 2021, we had 40 employees. By 2024, 112. The previous spring, a development company out of Boston had approached us about a formal valuation in preparation for a potential acquisition discussion. The number they came back with had made West go very still in his chair and then say, slowly, "Nadia, that's not a small firm number." It was not. $840 million, final board approval that morning. The acquisition wasn't finalized. We were still in negotiation, still deciding whether we wanted to sell or accept a strategic partnership or neither. But the valuation was real. It had been real for 3 months. I had told my husband the night the first number came in. I had told no one else. My mother-in-law still thought I did residential work. The guests arrived at 6:30. By 7, the lawn was crowded with exactly the kind of people my in-laws collected. Corporate attorneys, hospital board members, the congressman from the district, 2 retired hedge fund managers who had been friends of my father-in-law since business school. My husband arrived at 6:45, kissed my cheek, squeezed my hand once in the specific way that meant, "How are you doing? Tell me later," and went to find his parents. I stood near the edge of the garden with a glass of white wine I wasn't drinking and watched the evening arrange itself. My sister-in-law found me first. She was 3 years older than my husband, sharp in the way that people who grew up competitive get sharp, and she had never quite forgiven me for the name thing. She appeared at my elbow in a dress that cost more than my first month's rent in Brooklyn. "You look tired," she said. "Long drive. You should have taken the train. It's so much easier." She said it the way she said most things to me, like she was offering help and delivering a verdict simultaneously. "Mother was worried you wouldn't come." I said I'd come. You know how she is. She glanced toward where our mother-in-law was holding court near the rose garden, laughing at something the congressman had said. Big nights matter to her. She needed the whole family. I said nothing. I had learned over 7 years that saying nothing was usually the best option. My sister-in-law filled silence like it offended her. "So how's work?" She turned back to me, her tone shifting into the specific register she used when she was about to be condescending while appearing curious. "Still doing houses and stuff? We finished a corporate campus in Austin last fall and a performing arts center in Philadelphia that opens in November." She blinked. "A performing arts center? That's for who?" "A non-profit arts organization, 12,000 square feet, full acoustic design." "Huh." She seemed briefly uncertain how to recalibrate. "Well, that sounds like a lot of work for not a lot of—" She paused, chose the word carefully, "scale." I smiled. I picked up my wine. You'd be surprised. Dinner was served at 8, and by 8:15 I understood that I had been seated at the far end of the main table, next to my husband's elderly great-uncle who was hard of hearing and a woman I didn't recognize who turned out to be the wife of someone's accountant. My mother-in-law sat at the other end beside the congressman. My father-in-law sat at the head, glass raised, voice carrying. 40 years, he said when the toasts began. 40 years of building something that lasts. A family, a name, a legacy that means something to the people who carry it. Applause. My husband caught my eye from across the table and gave me a small, apologetic look. I shook my head slightly. I was fine. I was always fine. My sister-in-law stood next. Her toast was polished, funny in a rehearsed way, exactly calibrated to make their mother tear up and their father look satisfied. She mentioned the family business, the company, the name. She did not mention me. The accountant's wife leaned over and said kindly, "It's such a beautiful property." "It is," I agreed. "Do you work?" she asked. "Or are you—" "She does residential design," my sister-in-law said from 2 seats down, without looking up from her plate. "Small projects." I set down my fork. I picked it up again. Somewhere around the third course, my phone buzzed in my clutch, and I glanced at it under the table. A message from West. Board signatures are in. Official. Go celebrate. And then, 3 seconds later, also I told my mom. She cried, "Just so you know what you're dealing with." I locked the screen. The string quartet shifted into something slower. My father-in-law was telling the congressman about a real estate investment he was considering, some commercial property in Stamford. The numbers he mentioned were the kind that would have seemed large to me once. The evening continued. Dessert came, a layered chocolate torte with raspberries, and my mother-in-law moved through the tables accepting congratulations with the grace of someone who had practiced this exact motion for decades. She paused at our end of the table. "Everything all right down here?" She looked at the great-uncle, at the accountant's wife. Her eyes passed over me briefly and settled on her son. "Colton, your father wants you for a photo before people start to leave. Be right there." He stood, touched my shoulder. Back in 5. My mother-in-law remained, adjusting the centerpiece, one of those small adjustments people make when they want to stay somewhere without committing to staying. She glanced at me. "Thank you for making the drive." "Of course," I said. 40 years is a real milestone." "It is." She paused. "I know these evenings aren't always easy for you. The industry talk, the business discussions, it must feel a bit outside your world." She said it gently. That was the thing I had never been able to fully explain to my husband. The gentleness of it. She wasn't being cruel. She had simply decided, years ago, what my world was, and she continued to describe it to me with perfect, considerate precision. I looked at her. I thought about the number on my phone. I thought about West crying. No, West's mother crying. I thought about the drafting table in Crown Heights and the mold problem, and the senior partner who had said, "Perhaps not the presents clients expect," and the 4 minutes I had sat in that bathroom stall deciding what my life was going to be. "Actually," I said, "there's something kind of funny about tonight." She tilted her head. The polite curiosity of a woman who expected to be mildly entertained. "I got some news this morning," I said. "About the firm." "Oh? We completed a valuation." I said it the way you'd say it in a meeting. Matter of fact, for a potential acquisition. She nodded slowly. Still polite, still waiting for the punchline, which she assumed would be modest. A small sale, a regional story, something she could respond to with "how wonderful for you." $840 million, I said. The polite expression did not disappear. It just stopped moving. Like a clock that had lost its mechanism but still showed a time. "I'm sorry," she said. "The valuation, that's what the board approved this morning." I picked up my water glass. "We're one of the fastest-growing architecture firms in the country. We have 112 employees. We designed the Callaway Performing Arts Center in Philadelphia, the Voss Medical Center in Houston, that one's named for my grandmother. She would have loved it, and we're currently in pre-development on a mixed-use project in Los Angeles that's been covered in the Times and the Journal." My mother-in-law said nothing. Her hand had gone still on the centerpiece. "I know you've always thought of what I do as small," I said. I never corrected it. Maybe I should have. But I think part of me wanted to see what it looked like from here. What the view was like from this table, when you thought I was still doing residential work. I paused. Now I know. From across the lawn, I heard my father-in-law's voice carrying over the quartet. Then it stopped. I looked up. He was standing near the rose garden with his son, and he was looking at me. My husband had his phone out. He was showing him something. The architectural record profile, probably, or the Boston Globe piece from April, or any number of things that had been published about Meridian in the last 2 years that none of them had ever Googled because they had never thought to. My father-in-law walked toward us. His expression was a specific kind of complicated that I had not seen on him before, something between recalculation and something I couldn't quite name yet. "Colton says," he started. "It's all accurate," I said. "I've been watching for a while. I wanted to see who you all were when you thought the stakes were low." The string quartet finished their song. In the silence between pieces, the night felt very still. My sister-in-law appeared at my mother-in-law's shoulder. She had clearly walked over because she'd noticed the stillness. "What's happening?" My mother-in-law looked at her, looked at me. Your sister-in-law's company, she said slowly, like she was reassembling the words as she said them, has been valued at $840 million, I said pleasantly. My sister-in-law laughed, an involuntary sound too sharp to be convincing. For an architecture firm, that's unusual, yes, I agreed. We'd had a good few years. My father-in-law sat down in the empty chair beside me. This surprised me more than anything else that had happened that evening. He sat down, not as an authority claiming space, but as a man who needed to sit. He looked at the table for a moment, then he looked at me. Why didn't you say anything? I am saying something, I said. Tonight. But before, for years, you called me the artist, I said, every time. 7 years. I kept my voice even. Not hard, not soft. You introduced me to your friends as Colton's wife. She does something with buildings. You seated me at the end of the table next to people you didn't need to impress. You've been explaining my world to me at every dinner for the entire time I've been in this family. I paused. I don't think it came from cruelty. I think you genuinely didn't see me, and I needed to know what that looked like all the way through, before I said anything. The congressman had drifted closer. Not intrusively, just gravitationally, the way people move toward things that seem important. He looked at my father-in-law with an expression I recognized as one professional assessing another. Is this, he said to my father-in-law, gesturing vaguely between us, is this my daughter-in-law, my father-in-law said. He said it differently than he'd said it before. Like the words had new weight. Nadia Voss, I said. Meridian Architecture. The congressman's expression shifted. Wait, Meridian did the Callaway Center? We did. I was at the groundbreaking, he said. The senator gave a speech. I remember reading the firm profile. I didn't. He looked at my father-in-law. You didn't mention this. My father-in-law said nothing. My sister-in-law had gone the specific color that people go when they realize they've been wrong about something for a very long time. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, part disbelief, part something more honest, something that might eventually become respect if she let it. The Performing Arts Center, she said, the one in Philadelphia, opens in November. I saw something about that in, I think it was Architectural Digest. They had a feature. She stopped. She looked like she was doing math she didn't want to finish. Was that cover story? February issue. She sat down. My husband came back to the table. He looked at his family, at the expressions on their faces, and he looked at me. He had known. He had watched me carry this for 3 months, not from hiding, but from the same stillness that I had learned somewhere between Brooklyn and here. The knowledge that timing matters, that some truths land differently when they arrive in the right moment. She's been like this the whole time, he said to no one in particular, with the tone of a man who found this completely unsurprising and privately very funny. My mother-in-law sat down at the table. Not in her usual seat, just the nearest chair, with a lack of ceremony that was unlike her. She looked at me for a long moment, and when she spoke her voice was different from anything I'd heard from her in 7 years. The marble quality was gone. What was underneath was just a woman. I owe you an apology, she said. I let that sit. I didn't rush past it or minimize it the way you're tempted to, the way politeness trains you to say, oh, don't worry about it, it's fine. I let it sit where she'd put it. The artist, she said, almost to herself. I called you that in my head. I think I thought it was affectionate. That's what I told myself. She shook her head slightly. I was lazy. I had decided what you were and I stopped paying attention. That's not affection, that's its own kind of unkindness. It is, I said. I should have asked, she said, years ago, what you were building, what you cared about. I didn't ask because I thought I already knew. My father-in-law had been quiet through all of this. He was looking at the table, and when he finally spoke, it came out rough. Like the words had to clear something first. You designed the Voss Medical Center, he said. I did, in Houston. Yes, I read about that project, 2 years ago maybe, in the journal. He paused. I remember thinking whoever built that had something, a specific quality. I remember the name, Meridian. He looked at me. I didn't connect it. You wouldn't have, I said. You didn't know the firm was mine. He nodded once. Slowly. "No," he said. "I didn't." The quartet began a new song. The other guests had resumed their conversations, the way guests do when the thing they'd been watching resolves into something private. My sister-in-law's husband had appeared, whispered something to her. She shook her head, and he went away. The congressman had found my father-in-law's business partner and was talking to him across the lawn, glancing back occasionally. I looked at the table. At the torte someone had brought to our end that I hadn't eaten. At the centerpiece my mother-in-law had adjusted twice tonight. At my husband, who was watching me with an expression I knew well, the one that meant, "I'm proud of you, and also I was a little worried you were going to handle this very differently, and I'm glad you didn't." "I have a question," my sister-in-law said. Her voice had changed too. Something stripped out of it. "The acquisition, are you selling?" "We haven't decided. West and I are still talking about it. West is your partner. He's been with Meridian from the beginning. Whatever we decide together." She nodded. She looked at her hands. "I said something earlier," she said, "about scale, about small projects." "You did. That was—" She stopped, started again. I was repeating what I'd heard at this table for years. I wasn't thinking. I was just filling in the same information I'd always had. She looked up. "I'm sorry." "That's not an excuse, but I am sorry." I thought about what it had taken to get here. Not the work, exactly. The work I had always known how to do. I meant the specific kind of patience required to sit at the end of a table year after year and be misdescribed by people who loved someone you loved, and to wait, not to prove anything, not immediately, just to wait until you knew enough about who they were to know what you wanted to say and when. "I don't need you to be sorry," I said. "I need it to be different going forward." She nodded. It was a different nod from earlier in the evening. Smaller, more honest. My mother-in-law reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. Not the grip of someone performing warmth, just a touch. There and then gone. "Tell me about the Los Angeles project," she said. I looked at her. "Please," she added. "I actually want to know." So I told her. I told her about the site in Culver City, the mixed-income housing component we'd fought for and won, the community input process that had taken 8 months and produced a building that actually responded to the people who were going to live in it. I told her about the material sourcing, the passive cooling design, the courtyard that was going to open onto a street that had been closed to pedestrian traffic for 30 years. My father-in-law listened. He didn't interrupt, which was unusual. At one point, he leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, in the posture of a person who is actually listening rather than waiting to respond. The party wound down around 11. Guests began drifting toward their cars. The caterers broke down the tables at the far end of the lawn. The string quartet packed up quietly, their cases clicking shut in the dark. I found West's name in my phone and sent him a message. "It's done. I'll call tomorrow. Tell your mom the crying was appropriate." He sent back a single emoji. Then, one condition for the acquisition vote. "We keep the name." Obviously, I wrote back. My husband was saying goodbye to his father near the front steps when I came outside. My father-in-law shook his hand, then looked at me over his son's shoulder. He held my eyes for a moment. "I'll read the journal piece again," he said. "The Voss Center profile. I want to read it knowing what I know now." "You don't have to," I said. "I know I don't have to." He paused. "I want to." I nodded. In the car driving south on 95, the city beginning to glow on the horizon, my husband reached over and took my hand without saying anything. The radio was low. Outside, the highway was nearly empty in the way that late-night highways in November go empty, like the world has gotten smaller and quieter, and it's just the road in the dark and the lights in the distance. "How do you feel?" he asked eventually. I thought about it. Not the quick answer, the real one. "Like the room finally has the right dimensions," I said. He nodded like he understood, which he did. He always did. It was one of the things I had gotten completely right. The city got closer. My phone was quiet. The valuation number sat somewhere in my email, patient and unmoving, waiting for me to decide what I wanted to do with it. $840 million built from a drafting table and a mold problem and a bathroom stall and 4 minutes of deciding who I was going to be. I had been at this long enough to know that the number wasn't the point. The number was just the thing that was visible. What mattered was what was underneath it. The 112 people who came to work every morning because they believed in what we were building, the communities that had needed something for years and finally had it, the buildings that would stand long after anyone remembered how they got there. My mother-in-law had asked me to tell her about Los Angeles. That was where we were going to start. I was still deciding about the acquisition. I would probably always be deciding, in some version, about what to keep and what to let change. West had opinions, I had opinions. We had always been good at disagreeing productively. But the name, Meridian, that part was settled. Some things you build slowly, in the right order, for the right reasons, and by the time anyone else can see them, you have already been living inside them for years. That was what I had been doing, and now, finally, they could see it too. I have thought a lot about the moment my mother-in-law said I was lazy. Not cruel, lazy. There's a difference, and I think it matters more than people realize. Cruelty at least requires attention. What my in-laws did to me for 7 years wasn't cruelty. It was indifference dressed up in good manners. They had filed me under a category, the artist, the wife, the one who does something with buildings, and once something is filed, you stop looking at it, you think you already know what's there. What I learned from those 7 years is that invisibility is only a disadvantage if you're in a hurry. I wasn't in a hurry, I was building something, and there is a specific kind of freedom that comes from being underestimated by people who are too comfortable to look carefully. You get to work without interference. You get to make decisions without anyone second-guessing you because they don't believe enough in what you're doing to bother. My father-in-law's disinterest was, in a strange way, one of the best things that ever happened to Meridian. I don't say that to be clever. I say it because I think it's a real truth about how hard things get built. The scrutiny comes after, the respect comes after. What comes first, almost always, is the long stretch where nobody's watching, where the work is just you and the drafting table and the question of whether you actually believe in what you're doing, or whether you've been performing belief this whole time. I had to find out which one I was. The mold problem in the studio apartment and the 4 minutes in the bathroom stall, that's what they were for. West used to say the difference between people who build something real and people who only talk about building something is the answer to one question: what do you do on the day you're completely certain it won't work? I had plenty of those days. I had a year of those days after the Brownsville clinic, when the referrals weren't coming and the rent was due and my sister-in-law was name-dropping 4-star restaurants at Thanksgiving while I was eating cereal for dinner in Red Hook. What I did on those days was go back to the drafting table. Not because I was certain it would work, because I had decided that this was who I was going to be, and I wasn't willing to revise that decision just because the timeline was hard. That's the thing nobody tells you about resilience. It's not a feeling. It's not waking up energized and optimistic. Most days it's closer to stubbornness, a refusal to let a bad month rewrite a decision you made in a clear moment. I made my decision in a bathroom stall in Midtown when I was 26. I have been honoring that decision ever since. What I wanted that night in Greenwich wasn't to humiliate anyone. I wanted them to see me, the real version, not the category. And I wanted to understand something about myself, whether I could sit at that table in that house with all of that quiet dismissal and remain someone I recognized. I could, I did. And the moment my mother-in-law said, "Tell me about Los Angeles," I actually want to know, that was worth more to me than the valuation, because it meant something had actually changed, not just shifted. Real things take a long time. That's not a hardship. That's how you know they're real.